Welcome back, everybody. Our next speaker is an artist and roboticist based out of Las Vegas, Nevada, who creates machines and wearables with the intention of reframing the way that people relate to technology. To that end, iteration is a huge part of their practice, so they document and share all of their builds on their tech blog and on YouTube. This speaker believes that hardware creators have the power to reshape the world with their creations, and they hope to encourage others to create the things that they want to see. Please welcome to the Hackaday Superconference stage, Sara Pettis.
Can I take this microphone with me? Yeah? Cool. Hi, guys. So first and foremost, before I get started, I want to thank Supplyframe and Hackaday for having me back for the 4th year in a row to talk about my stuff. I'm totally geeked to be here. I'm talking about something new this year. But anyhow, my name is Sara Pettis. Like the intro is great. I don't really have to say anything more than that, really, but I'm gonna. Most of the things that I create, the robots or the mechanisms that I produce are based on my own drawn content. And let's see. They're based on my own drawn content, and I realized over a period of time that everything that I create is a reflection of something that I'm going through in my head or in my life. It's kind of like a coping mechanism. So everything's highly personal, but I usually don't realize this until like way after the fact. So within like, I don't know, the first couple of months of this year, I looked back on my work that I've done in the past, and I saw that one of the things I produced, there's this project called Light Play that I made with my partner Mark. It's 100 miniature Delta robots that you can control with your body. And I created this at a point in time in my life where I felt really powerless. And my response to that powerless feeling was to make a robot army. And that kind of fixed that, and I felt better about, that powerless feeling. When I was about 27, 28, I started having all these weird maternal things happen to me where I felt like I needed to nurture something and raise something in my image and kind of, I don't know, make a mini version of myself, but I didn't want anyone else to be involved. So I created a robot named Noodle Feet, who's my robotic offspring, and I've been raising him, for the past 4 years, and he's a representation of the very best parts of myself. And that was a reflection of, I guess, my maternal instincts kicking in, because I'm an animal and I have those, and there's nothing I can do about them, I guess. This year in my life, I started a new project, and it's called Shibon, or Shibon. That should be reminiscent of the French, like, so good, but also lady boner. So that's where the name comes from. And Shibon is a platform that is meant to facilitate in sensing and indicating different aspects of my arousal. And let's see, why? I can like scoot over to that. All right, why would I want to do this? I'm not making a utility, so I don't actually think that humans, particularly me, I don't think we need help indicating to one another when we're aroused. Like, I think we've got that under control. We can do that. But I did want to start a dialogue about sexuality and intimacy, one that helped kind of normalize the whole topic amongst people, because I found that in my life, while I was growing up, I had a really difficult time coming into my own as a sexual being. It was a really frustrating, isolating, embarrassing, confusing struggle that it wasn't like a small period. It's kind of like up until now, really. Like my whole life has been this strife. And I think that in the beginning, like when I was young, this was due in part to the fact that I didn't have very many good examples of adults having healthy dialogues with one another about sex. There's nothing. And I grew up in Las Vegas, so in lieu of having examples that I could draw upon to kind of fill this void, really horrible things like the media, like movies and the internet, and Vegas filled this gap, and I think it was damaging. And I think a lot of this could have been alleviated if there was just better communication. So this whole project it's not meant to solve like whether or not we can tell each other we're turned on. It's meant to get us talking about who we are as animals in a way that's relatable. So how? Let's see. And by how, I don't mean getting the discussion going. I mean, how am I actually going to sense my own arousal? That's a really kind of a tricky thing, right? Like females or me, like a female thing that I am, we don't have as clear-cut indicators as dudes, right? Right? Like everyone knows when a dude's turned on. Like even if you can't visually look, like you know, right? Generally. So there's things we can tap into in our own bodies that do give tells of when I'm going to talk about myself, when I'm entering a aroused or excited state. So I knew that there are sensors that can help do this, right? Like there's a lot of things that we can grab at that are affordable that sense these things, like body temperature, heart rate, galvanic response, blush response, facial expression, muscle tension, just to name a few. I'm sure you know and have worked with sensors that sense all of these things. And I decided to do this. I wanted to create basically a suit of amour, right? Like a suit of armor. I wanted to become a, yeah. I wanted to become like a sex Gundam, basically. But yeah, like kind of like this. But my armor is just going to tell you whether I'm interested in what I'm feeling. That's not very robot-y, but whatever. So in order to do this, I knew I'd have to create different augments that would key in on what each part of my body tells. So they'd each be, they would manifest in a different way, and they'd use different sensors to kind of get different types of value from each part of my body, and then cross-reference that data so that I could tell if I was actually excited or if I was getting some other type of false positive, which is, I don't know, something that I haven't gotten to yet, I'll be honest. But I know that that's how it's going to work. Let's see. So the goal of each of these augments that I'm creating, and I'm going to say there's 9 total, like I picked 9 like discrete parts of my body that I'm going to create these wearables for. And I decided right at the beginning when I first declared that I was doing this project that they'd have 2 main primary objectives. There's the input. Each augment will sense something from the part of the body that it's meant to fasten to. All right? Whether that's 1 sensor, 2 sensors, doesn't matter, whatever makes sense. And each augment will use that data to indicate something to the world, so the output. Additionally, and this is the really fun additionally thing, there's extra credit. If the indication can stimulate me as a byproduct and create a feedback loop, then that's good. But that's not the point. It's not meant to be a masturbation suit. It's meant to communicate. It's meant to tell people what I'm feeling, right? But I can tell you with everything that I've kind of brainstormed, this extra credit thing's big, because that's the fun challenge to solve for. So I'm going to talk about the thing that's on my back a little bit. That's the pulse pack. Yeah. This is the primary brain of the Shibon project. This is the thing that it sends out data, it sends and receives data, and it's going to also log it in the next iteration so that I can make sense of the data and decide how it's going to be used. I chose to make it into a backpack form because it's centrally located on my body, and it effectively turns the circuit board inside of it into a wearable breakout board. And everything that I make plugs into the edges of it, as you can see, kind of around me. And there we go. That's everything I just said. Yeah. But most important thing to take away from it is that it's a wearable breakout board. To visualize it better, this is kind of how it works. Heart, and then these are the 9 different parts of the body that I chose to key in on, like specifically. The board that's inside of it looks like this, and it's called the Pulse. It's got the wiggliest traces ever, and if you haven't done that yet, you should. Which means I think you have to use Eagle, right? No? The other one does it? Doesn't matter. Just do it. So this board It fits inside of the heart-shaped enclosure, and this is up on my Hackaday IO. If like you want a heart-shaped backpack that doesn't act as a backpack very well, because because you do, you can build one. I walk you through how to do it. It's great because you don't actually have to sew anything. It's all made with 3D printed parts, and I got a bolt of that's vinyl. Yep. And there are holes in both that correspond to one another, and I plastic riveted them together with pieces of raw filament taken straight off of the 3D printer spool. You kind of thread the tiny pieces in between the plastic and the vinyl, and then you use your soldering iron to create a little bead on either side, smash it together with your fingers because you like pain, and then you have a backpack. I think I lied. The part I did sew is the straps, because that makes sense. But pretty much the entire thing is all 3D printed in like hardware. So it's not really very textile-y in that sense. And the finished product looks like this. I used a lot of pictures of it, just so you can see. And that's what's on my bag. To get back to the board, I'm going to talk about that just briefly a little bit more before I move on to the augments and all their goodiness. The Pulse board has Molex connectors around the outside, and they terminate to, like, it's not Cat 5, it's the, I forget, RJ45, is that it? Yes. That's the socket that it goes to around the outside. So this is what it looks like on the inside of the backpack. There's a visual aesthetic that goes to it. I wanted it to look attractive because it is a wearable, and I do want to kind of help sculpt what that cyberpunk future is going to end up actually becoming when we get to it. Because we like speculating about it, right? But I think the future's now, and we're already making that stuff, right? Like everybody in here is producing that stuff already. So I wanted to make sure that it looked interesting visually. So this was kind of what I was going for. And that's another picture of those connectors I was telling you about. I'll be honest, I don't like how that turned out, so it's probably going to change in the next iteration. But for now, they look pretty stellar. Yeah. And I'm going to scoot along really quick. Again, this is on my blog if you want to make it, and then on Hackaday.io as well. But the exciting thing about this project, like the part that's worth talking about, are the individual augments. And there's 3 that I'm going to cover. I have them with me here. So after I'm done talking, I'll probably go and demo them in action. The first one that I ended up making, I'll be honest, when I decided I was going to actually go through and build this project, I didn't actually know what I was going to make yet for my body. The concept of it sounded interesting to me. It sounded like a viable way to like achieve the goal of, getting people talking about sexuality using tech as the catalyst. But I was laying in bed one morning when I came up with the idea for the first one. That's like a really weird just way to start that out. I was laying in bed one morning. But I was waking up, and let's see, I'll just switch to that. It's called the beatbox. I was laying in bed one morning, and my head actually said to itself while I was kind of coming to, God, I could just really use a pussy whisperer right now. Like, my mind said it. And my eyes opened, and as like the phrase kind of like transitioned from abstraction to the literal, I went like, pussy whisperer. And I was like, ha, that's like a really, yeah. And I jumped out of bed and I ran to my lab like right away, and I got a pair of calipers out and I started measuring my pelvic bone because I knew what I wanted to make, because that's how any good day starts, right? And I got these calipers out, I measured my pelvic bone, and I created an enclosure for a device that I call the beatbox. And the way that it works is it basically has a speaker mounted inside of it, and it whispers nonsense into my nether region at a volume equal to my heart rate. So the way that this works is if my heart rate is only slightly elevated, then the volume of the whispers, the nonsense whispers, is barely audible, and I can feel it, but you can't hear it. But that's where this feedback loop thing kind of plays in. If I feel it, then my heart rate is going to elevate, and then the volume is going to get louder, and then my heart rate is going to elevate, and then the volume is going to get louder, and then eventually people are going to start wondering why there's a voice coming out of my underwear. And then it becomes kind of performative, and it involves other people at that point, but only once I'm aroused or excited or confused. So I designed this thing, going back to the Sex Gundam thing, I you know what I'm talking about. Like, mechs have this, like, really strong pelvic bone thing going on that is very noticeable. I think everyone's noticed that about them. I wanted to make kind of, not a lady, not very ladylike, but I wanted to make one that was more reminiscent of who I am as a person. So I started spitballing how my Lady Gundam pelvic box would look. And I used Fusion 360 and I designed this enclosure. It's based on my pelvic contour and like the relative slope of like my pelvic bone, I think. And I printed the thing out, and PLA, I used some thin, transparent sheet, I think that's ABS, to curve around the contour to act as a light diffuser. But I also kind of realized at this point, like early on, that it looks kind of like a fillet of fish. Like, you know, like there's like the curve to it, and there's kind of like the silveriness, looks like scales. There's just something to note at this point. So cross section, you can see the speaker on the inside. In the very, very front, I have another image that shows that in another couple of slides, but the board mounts there. Everything kind of fits in there as a nice, neat package, but the speaker is aimed right at the important point of, reception, I guess. So to get back to that fish fillet thing, me and everyone I know that I was talking to about making this project, we started calling it like the whispering crotch salmon. That became the nickname for this peripheral. So I had to take it to that level, that salmon level, and I created some salmon marbling for the grating, so you can actually see the electronics on the inside, and it lights up. It's the future. It's the cyberpunk future I want to live in. Salmon. Okay, so when I designed the circuit board, I knew that had to go. I had to go full salmon at this point. So the board had to look like salmon as well. I wanted to either make it look like nigiri, or I don't know what that's called. Is that a fillet? Steak? It's a steak? What do you think I went with? The steak. Yeah. I mean, of course. So I designed a circuit board called the Filet-O. It looks like that. And basically what's hooked up to it is op-amp, SD card reader to hold those delicious whispers, the speakers, and then of course LEDs, because that thing lights up. Like, it's got to. And it looks like that. It was also made in Eagle. And I don't know if anyone, okay, I'm gonna say this, is if anyone knows where to get orange solder mask, please tell me. Because they're red. I got them made in red because that was the closest thing I could get to like a salmon-y orange. I couldn't find it. But this is what the board looks like front and back once it's assembled. And it mounts in the very front of the salmon. So if I take the little shield off, then you get this nice little like backlit steak outline? I don't know. But yeah. I've done 3 iterations so far. I have like the working one with me. I had to slim it down significantly because it chafed. It was huge. It was like a giant box. And it looked very beautiful as a designed object, but it wasn't very functional as a wearable. And I do want to wear these one of these days. That is the end goal. So I made a like salmon light or a salmon slim, and it's with me, and it still fits everything inside of it. So I will definitely demo that once I'm done giving a chat. But back to, I'm gonna move on to like my next peripheral. Like right after the beatbox came into existence, I had a bottom piece that worked. I wanted to make something for the top half of my body. So now that I had my feet wet on working on these body augments, my mind was already kind of like juiced up on how to approach making this sort of, tongue-in-cheek, like visual, it's like not a joke, but there's a narrative going on there. And the next thing that I created was an augment called the propeller pasties. Some of you guys got stickers from me, right? Like while we were here? Yeah. Okay, so the propeller pasties are super fun. I love them. I would never wear them as they are right now for reasons that I'll get back to. But This project started because my partner Mark had a large number of these IR distance sensors laying around the lab, like a lot of them. And the IR distance sensors are notable because they're really great at reading fluctuations in size within like 5 or 6 millimeters, like a really tiny amount of fluctuation, which is roughly the operating distance of a nipple. Roughly, probably not me, but like yeah. So I decided to use these sensors, since we had a bunch of them, and create a device that measured nipple diameter and nipple width, just to see if it was possible. And I made a pasty standoff, and I used the data that was received from the sensor to spin propellers on the outside of the pasty. It so the speed relates to the stiffness. Now, the spinning wasn't enough. I knew that there would need to be a gearbox involved in order to spin this nipple, right? To get it to go the right speed that I wanted. So I consequently had just gotten this really cool toy from Tokyo. It was this little rover, and I had assembled it. And there's this really kind of, if I click on it, will it play? Oh no. It's a GIF. It should go. Will it just? Oh. Oh, it did? Oh. Yeah. Okay. So it has this really showy, kind of unnecessarily dramatic spinning planetary gear box that does its thing. I really liked this, and I decided to use this implement to make the propeller spin. But there's also this really like delicious motion going on there. This is what it ended up looking like. So the gearbox does its thing. It spins the propeller. There's the little motor mounted on the top that does the spinning. It has its aesthetic, but there's that whole thing with extra credit, right? Right? Like the stimulation is a byproduct. Oh no! You gotta harness that glorious motion of those spinning motors, or not motors. I'm sorry, gears, right? They're just. I had to do something with that, but you're thinking this already. Nipples and gears don't ever go together. Like, they shouldn't go together. I'm not saying they don't go together. They shouldn't ever go together, ever. Like, don't do this. If you need a reminder, I will give you a sticker and it can remind you. Put it on your mill. But I made these bumpers for the backside of those gears, and isn't that nice? It does its job. It's just I wouldn't want this. I'm not brave enough for this to be my body in there. But it had to be done I'm not even going to say for science, for art. It had to be done for art. But moving along. This is what the finished pasty standoff looked like. I ended up only using the top mounting sensor. It was easier, it just worked. I didn't want to complicate it yet. The really, really difficult part of making this thing was creating a universal mount for my assemblies, because one of the reoccurring issues that I ran into while developing the augments for this project was that I had to mount things to my body, and I'm made out of meat. So, and boobs are like a different type of meat. They're like this really soft meat, and nothing stays put. And I needed to have 2 different assemblies seat slightly differently from one another, and I didn't want to have 2 separate types of like pasty mounts, so I had to come up with a universal one, and I did. Each of the assemblies, they screw onto a similar universal, I don't know what you call that. I guess just a pasty mount, and they're threaded, so I can just screw them in, and they consequently seat at the correct position relative to the nipple, the thing that they're either like I guess massaging or measuring. But that was the hardest part of doing this whole project, this augment. So yeah, to test the nipple proxy to the nipple proxy to sensor propeller speed, I guess test situation. I again used earplugs, which come in like girl flavor, I guess. I don't know, I just had to add that. And they're pink, so they're, I guess, perfect. And I made a test fixture that does do exactly that. It utilizes cardboard, but it gets the job across, gets the job done. Let's see, I'm gonna talk about this very briefly. After I made the propeller pasties, I had a long break and I came back and I decided that I wanted to make a user interface that would allow me to have a quick sense of what was going on with these sensors on a screen, something that was visual. And I ended up creating something that's very, I guess it's Fallout-esque. It's like an arm-mounted like user display. I ended up calling it the Pop Girl instead of Pip-Boy. But if you think of the backpack is the computer tower, the arm-mounted user interface is kind of like the computer monitor, so the two go together pretty well. I designed like a cheeky little menu screen, so if something starts happening like to my body, the little like gingerbread girl starts blinking in that part, and if I look down and I see like, oh, like the little boobies are blinking or lighting up, then I can press nips, I can poke that, and it will like give me the discrete sensor values. And I created an enclosure for a what is it? It's a touch screen that uses the Raspberry Pi. It's one of the ones readily available on Adafruit. But I had to cram a bunch of stuff into it to get it to work and then still be thin enough that you'd want to wear it on your arm, which I still don't, but it looks cool. I'm going to iterate on it. I actually have instructions on how to build this thing also on my Hackaday IO, so if you want to riff on the enclosure, because I'll tell you this, when you get the screen, it comes with a bunch of modules hanging off of it that don't want to lay nicely relative to everything else, so you have to jump through some hoops. You can check out what I did if you're interested, and I can help you skip some of those tricky... Oh, there he goes, it doing? Yeah. There's those boobies lining up. It does work, by the way. So this is it working. So, moving along. This is like the last thing I'm gonna talk about. There we go. I'm wearing this right now. Okay, so this is the last augment I'm gonna discuss a little bit about, and this is the thing I just finished like probably a couple of weeks ago. Like I have it on. Before I explain what it is and what it does and how I made it, at this point I want to point something out that's very important in regard to this project. Every single one of these augments happened because of a conversation that I had with my friends, like late at night where you're just talking for hours into the night and you talk about a weird thing longer than you should. This particular talk was that not all ass grabs are equal, which I don't know, I guess they're not. And this kind of divulged into what is the most pleasurable aspect of having your butt squeezed, which I don't know if anyone's thought about that. Like, what is pleasurable about that action? We decided that there's a couple things to take into account. The challenge of making this augment became how do you mechanically replicate a proper tushy squeeze? The thing that we decided was that it had to manipulate your thigh meat in some capacity, and it also had to create like sufficient gap. So there needs to be some separation, like some pulling apart that happens, like when this occurs. And again, like since this is in vogue with all the other augments I'm creating, it has to be in response to my physical state. So some challenges arose. There's first and foremost the how. How am I going to do this? So I knew at some point in my life I wanted to create like a butt winch. I don't know what your life goals are, but that was one of mine. And I knew that if I was going to use a winch to pull on my butt, it would make sense that it would be mounted above my butt relative to it to pull it up and anchor it out. So I realized that I was going to make a winch belt, in fact, which is roughly something that looks like, I'm guessing, would look like this. And it would be mounted above my butt, and it would, help ratchet that up. And once I realized that I was going to have to make a winch belt, the second challenge kind of arose, which is the whole problem of meat again. I'm going to get back to that. Winches are usually mounted to solid things, like Jeeps and trucks and stuff, right? And they don't move a whole lot. but like I'm a female, my body meat, like especially around my hips and my butt, moves quite a bit. There's a lot of it. And I wanted to work with my body instead of against it. And I didn't want to, didn't want to force anything. So I decided that when I created this belt, it made sense to leverage a part of our body that is pretty stationary. Luckily, we have skeletons, and my pelvic bone doesn't move a whole lot. So I made a belt that wraps around above and below my pelvis. And if I tighten it down, that bone pops kind of right out. And the belt isn't going to move anywhere. It doesn't go up or down or left or right. And I wanted to mount the winch directly on top of this hip bone, which kind of brought me to my third challenge, which is don't hurt yourself. Making a winch that spreads your butt apart, right? Basically to create the artificial thigh gap. That's dangerous. I had to specify a motor that would be strong enough to actually separate my meat, but it was weak enough that it didn't actually split my butt in half. And I had to defer to one of my friends, or several of my friends that know a lot more about actual math and engineering than I do. I don't have an engineering background. We had a couple sessions where we mocked up a test, like a test environment, and I was able to determine through their math, my friend Tony, he's actually known as, like, affectionately as my butt technician now because he's helped me so much with these problems. We determined it takes 10 pounds of raw force to lift one of my butt cheeks, which is like a really, an interesting thing to know. Which I could get. I don't have a lot of time. I can't explain how we figured that out. But it involved like springs and weights and scales, and I guess 10 pounds of raw force translates into roughly 150 inches of torque. So I was able to specify which motor I needed, and I went up a little bit, and I picked a motor that I think it was 200 inches of torque, and it mounts inside of these enclosures that I'm wearing on my body right now. And this bracket is responsible for sort of holding the winch at the right trajectory so that the angle of approach from the spool of the winch to my butt is appropriate, that there isn't any weird resistance, which again is kind of a tricky thing to pull off because we're talking about the body, and there isn't a very easy way to do this, and it's still not very ideal, but it works. I mounted the thing in there, and I used some thin wire. I added spools to it, and I kind of created this dark spacer that you see there, that black piece underneath the bracket, because I had to actually boost the motor up a little bit just to allow for a better angle going from the top of my hip down to my butt. Once the enclosure was sealed up, I was able to test it out, and I was very pleased to see that it worked, because I honestly didn't think that it would. I thought I would have that tractor beam problem, like in space, where once the beam's established, the two things kind of, they move towards one another, rather than one thing staying put and pulling on the other. But given, even with skin and flesh, it ended up working pretty well. And here, it works. It did exactly what I wanted it to. So this is supposed to act in response to my temperature in between my thighs. So given a temperature sensor, if the heat occurs, or the heat raises in between my thighs, the winches will slowly spread that meat apart. And once a certain threshold is passed, this isn't mounted on here yet, but the goal is that a light will illuminate at the back of my legs, and it will make that triangle, that artificial gap triangle, glow from the front. And this augment is called the hotspot for that reason. Yeah. I should give it a hotspot too. That'd be better. So the important thing to note about all of these things, and I'm gonna go into my closing at this point. I'm using technology and engineering as a catalyst to get people talking about sex and intimacy. And I think that over the summer that I worked on these projects and then I involved different people in doing so, it definitely happened. I got people talking about these things in a way that felt very organic. And I think that if we can continue to encourage this sort of interaction through like unrelated topics like engineering or art or other things, we can slowly kind of correct this weird taboo culture that is still kind of embedded in our social culture right now. And in the future, we won't have people like, or less people like me who grow up and have moments in their life where they feel isolated or alone or confused or any of those things. Because I think that our sexuality should empower us as humans. It shouldn't be a negative thing. So I think we can do that. We just have to talk. I believe that our technology can add a more personal layer to human interaction. I think that all of us are really good at creating utilities, and I think that in the future, more people like us will create things just for ourselves that will help express aspects of our physical state that are subtle or otherwise go completely unnoticed. And that doesn't necessarily have to be arousal. It can just be something about you that you could tell in a beautiful way through technology. The things we personally create for ourselves enhance our perception of the world and help expand our ability to communicate to one another. Those will ultimately make day-to-day encounters with people more exciting and more memorable, and I think that will improve our quality of life. And I think that's something that we could think more about too, how to make life more awesome. So the thing I want to leave you with before I take off is using your knowledge and expertise, what would you create to communicate something about yourself that would otherwise go unnoticed? Yeah, and thank you to my patrons on Patreon. Some of you guys are here. Thank you for backing me up. Your support is actually kind of it's the lifeblood of me making things like hip winches and stuff. And if you want to follow my doings, this is where all of my stuff is posted. I do YouTube avidly, but I also post all of my progress on this stuff on Twitter quite a bit. So again, thank you for having me back here, and keep making awesome stuff out there, and thank you for watching.
Thank you so much.